morning, everybody. Crappy Mondays, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's deputy online political editor, Lizzie Buchan. Morning, Lizzie.
Morning.
So this is the People's Pay-Per-View. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast, we just have to wait for Rishi Sunak to let you have the opportunity to tell him what you think of him, won't you? So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on an interview with Alex Batty, the young man taken abroad by his mum and granddad without permission when he was just 12, and who finally walked out of France and back into his frantic grandmother's life a few months ago. Now aged 18, he seems very healthy and happy. He started dating, says he doesn't want his mum or granddad caught, but never expects to hear from either of them again. There's more on that inside the paper if you're interested. It's a great interview. But let's talk about something else that's been dominating the news agenda in the past few weeks and no doubt in the future as well, which is children's access to vapes, the nicotine-laced supposed cigarette replacement, which actually seems to get people more addicted to nicotine. Now, Lizzie, there's a story here on page 7 which says there are vapes on sale which have been laced with spice. Are we talking about cinnamon or nutmeg?
We are not, no, we're not talking about cinnamon or nutmeg. So obviously one of our health editors done an investigation looking at looking at vapes, which basically have got drugs inside them that people have been using to, I suppose we were trying to establish what they were trying to do. I think instead of smoking a cigarette like you might traditionally, that you've been putting liquid inside a vape and using it as a way to consume drugs. So I think there was a big issue in the US around like school kids using vapes to smoke cannabis and that sort of thing. So obviously these are some extreme examples of children who've been hospitalized from consuming spice through their vapes, which is obviously really concerning.
Right, that's presumably the awful smell of toilet freshener that you get from vapes that covers up the far more pungent, recognisable smell of cannabis, perhaps, to some extent. Who knows? I don't, unfortunately. But so we've got these children. Now, Martin seems to have done some digging, perhaps freedom of information request. It looks like of NHS Trust, although it's not clear in the piece. They found how many children they've treated for vape-related conditions and found these 5 were allegedly using the same reusable vape pen. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Lizzie, but Rishi's crackdown on vapes that he announced a couple of weeks ago, that was on the disposable type that you throw away, wasn't it? So this isn't the kind of vape that would be banned under Rishi's watch, although you're not supposed to be selling it to children anyway. Somebody plainly is. You're not supposed to be putting drugs in it, but somebody plainly is. How could he possibly stop things like this? You know, we have a drugs trade that they don't regulate. So this is just the next step, isn't it? If you're a drug dealer.
Yeah, so this would be separate to what the government has announced, which is the ban of disposable vapes. So the sort of single-use, brightly coloured ones with brands like Elf Bar, Lost Mary that you tend to see quite a lot in corner shops, obviously quite popular with younger people. The reason the government have done that is because they're worried, well, the Prime Minister particularly is worried about how much vapes are appealing to teenagers and to school children in a way that, you know, that smoking rates have been declining since the smoking ban, but vaping has absolutely skyrocketed in the last couple of years. So that is sort of their first step on this, because there's not a lot of regulation in this area. Obviously, vapes are, you're not allowed to vape inside in the same way that you're not allowed to smoke inside, but it's very poorly enforced. There's not very much quality control on what's happening. You know, people are buying vapes, you never really have any idea what's in them. So the government, I think, has taken this sort of first step around, okay, let's ban single-use ones, which we know are appealing to young people. But they've been doing quite a lot of consulting around it about, you know, should they look at different kinds of flavours? Should there be stricter rules? So I wouldn't be surprised, you know, on the off chance that if Rishi Sunak did win the next election, that they might look at doing more on this space. But obviously that's a big if right now.
Well, yeah.
This is a very separate area, you know, like vapes, refillable vapes are not being banned. And I think, you know, this is something that wouldn't be covered by any of that because it involves drugs. It involves vapes that you can sell to younger people. So I think, this is something that we would have to think more
I mean,
broadly about.
If there's someone who wants to put drugs, and spice is a very unfriendly one, into something where, is it makes it easy to consume, and if someone wants to sell that to, illicitly around the back to a shop owner who wants to buy it and then make the profit on that, obviously without paying the normal taxes and so on the rest of it, and is happy also to sell to, in this particular case, 5 children aged between 14 and 16, then those things are going to happen if you kind of find a dealer or something who's going to sell this stuff to you. But also, one of these pens that was used in one of these incidents was labelled as a vaporesso, which implies it's a bit like an espresso of some sort, tastes like coffee. And the other was called lemonade vape cookies. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the crackdowns Rishi's talking about, I don't know if he's actually done it or not, was talking about making them less palatable, perhaps for children, less marketed to children. Something called lemonade vape cookies, maybe something that we all would like, but I'd suggest that's the kind of thing that's going to make it sort of a bit of a gateway for children to access it through. Those kind of flavours have to be one of the things that a government of whatever sort has to crack down on a bit, isn't it? You can't go around calling things, Smarties, and think that children aren't going to buy them.
Yeah, I think that as part of the consultation that the government did, we had a look at some of the questions they were asking, and they did ask the public and sort of doctors and whoever was feeding into their consultation about regulating flavours. But in the end, the support wasn't there for it, which I thought was quite interesting, because, there are some adults who might like a lemonade vape cookies pen, vape pen, though obviously that is going to appeal much more to young people. So I think, that might be another step that you would take once this initial ban has come in, because I think the government are treading quite a thin line between sort of public health and protection of young people and cracking down on the conduct of, of adults who should be able to make their own choices. I think they're trying to work out how to do that without being too draconian, and is banning certain flavours too draconian. I think that was part of the thinking. But yeah, these are obviously refillable pens, so they're not covered. And, there are arguments about whether those flavours are really suitable, whether you should try and sort of re-medicalise a vape like they used to be, in that it was only tobacco flavoured rather than all of these, or do you just have tobacco and menthol, was another option that the government offered on its consultation. But the public were less sort of fussed on that.
Well, yeah, if you get offer something in Jaffa cake flavour, the answer would be yes, please, if you ask the public. But I mean, if you had, what do you think, everybody? Have you got an issue with vapes being sold that are kind of sweet or perhaps nicer to ingest than a cigarette might be? Because if we started selling cigarettes tomorrow and someone decided to bring out a cigarette that was lemonade vape cookie flavour, I would suggest that the government would go, no, you're not going to do that. It's got nicotine and it gives you cancer. And vapes don't have, less likely to give you cancer, but they still have nicotine in. They're still very addictive, and they can still do other bad things to you health-wise, and they just wouldn't be allowed. What about something like, the plain packaging that you have to have on cigarettes and tobacco products these days to make it less appealing, that you have to have pictures of diseased lungs and so on it? If they had those kind of packaging rules for vapes as well, regardless of the flavour, surely that would make it a bit less likely that people are going to, and also had to do the thing that the cigarettes do. They have to be behind a curtain, can't be on display, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's something you could certainly do. I mean, again, I think they looked a bit at like how vapes are displayed, that sort of thing, but that isn't something that the government is doing at the moment. But yeah, the packaging is certainly an interesting part of it, because obviously a lot of the disposable vapes come in these really bright colours. They look a bit like highlighter pens. And I'm sure that, when I was at school, which was a while ago, vaping wasn't a thing that existed, but I'm sure that those would have been appealing, certainly, to people, to me and my peers, because of the way that they looked. And if everyone else was doing it, and these bright colours, like you could coordinate them with your clothes, like I can see why that would be appealing. Whereas the refillable ones tend to be a bit more they look a bit more practical. They're a bit less sort of aesthetically pleasing. So maybe that's part of the thinking. But I think there's a lot that could be done in this space. It just depends on how much the government wants to interfere, because conservative governments tend to traditionally say that they don't like to be too interventionist in people's lives. Boris Johnson often made a big thing about being anti the nanny state, and lots of the successive governments have resisted sugar taxes and things like this. But it's quite interesting that Rishi Sunak has decided to be he's really decided to intervene in a big way here, not just on vaping, but on smoking as well, which they want to bring in this incremental ban that means that, some people will never legally be able to smoke because they'll raise the smoking age by a year each year, which is also a big intervention in, telling adults that they can't
and
do
all those
what they
things
want.
are quite popular with voters, aren't they? It's one of the things that Rishi's done that people actually do approve of.
It's really popular. It's interesting.
It's quite easy, you'd have thought, just to amend through secondary legislation the regulations that we've already got about cigarettes and tobacco products, and just add vape products to that without need for any more voting, and just go, well, obviously it's still nicotine, it's still addictive, still does bad things for you, we're going to just push it out there. Adam says it encourages smoking more. The elephant in the room, of course, Lizzie, is that you're a vapor. Also, I've seen you vape once or twice. Yeah.
I'm a reformed vapor. I would say I was the target person. I used to be a smoker. I gave up using a vape, and then I started vaping. The vaping was so addictive that as an adult, I found I was unable to quit it and started vaping a lot. I've now given up vaping, and I would encourage others to do the same. I think it helped me give up cigarettes, which was good, but then I became so addicted to vaping that it was just a new thing. So I actually think it's quite good for the government to be intervening here, because vaping is very addictive.
Yeah, sorry, I should have checked. I was going to ask you something personal before we actually came on air. Whoops-a-daisy. But it's one of those things, isn't it, where because it's still got the addictive thing in it, which is the nicotine, it helps you get off the stuff that gives you the cancer, all the benzines and every other horrible stuff that's in cigarettes, but it's still got that addictive thing. And I know people who gave up smoking and started chewing, for example, nicotine gum. And because they could have nicotine gum when they couldn't have a cigarette, like in the office or somewhere else, they just chewed it all day to the point, and they were grinding their teeth at night, because it was just so bad. And I think nicotine replacement things they can help if you do it right, but if sometimes it makes things so much worse. Anyway, speaking of the nanny state, right? This is a big one. And I thought I was still asleep and having nightmares, and I read this morning. So one of the big stories of the day, and which I suspect might get a bit more traction later on in the week, terrified me, which is that apparently Labour wants to send parents back to school to have cooking and reading lessons alongside their children. Now, Lizzie, this is one of the candidates for the next Welsh Labour leader speaking. It's not Keir Starmer, it's not official Labour policy, but he's the former Education Minister of Wales. He's in with a crack of being the leader of Wales, and he wants to send parents back to school. What the hell? Can you explain this to us, please?
Yeah, I think you don't need to be too alarmed. But yeah, Jeremy Miles he's one of two candidates to succeed Mark Drakeford, who is standing down as the Welsh Labour leader and also First Minister of Wales. So Jeremy Miles and Vaughan Gethin are they're both currently ministers. Jeremy Miles is the schools minister in Wales. And they are going up against each other. So this is very much like a political interview. We've interviewed Vaughan Gethin before. We're now interviewing Jeremy Miles. And this is him trying to tell sort of the voters who are going to vote in the Labour leadership election in Wales what he stands for, to give them a sense of who he is as a person. So he's been schools minister. He's quite an interesting character, Jeremy Miles in general, but he's been helping to roll out their free school meals policy in primary schools, which is something that the Mirror is very keen on. So we've spoken to him about that a few times. But this interview he's done with my colleague, John Stevens, he's talking about, I think, basically one of his ideas of trying to engage parents more in schools. So there's some teachers, there's some theory in the education sector that obviously getting parents to buy into schools, their kids' education, is helpful for the kids, for the children's development and for their aspiration and attainment as well. Because if their parents value what they're doing at school, then it helps to encourage them more, and also to sort of engage parents who might need a bit more help. I think the suggestion would be that parents offered lessons in cookery and reading might be parents who are sort of, perhaps not as engaged with their community, with the schools, parents who might need a bit more help, who have less education, who are worse off, who might just need that extra support. And there's a way of doing that together. So that was my impression of this as an idea. But I think it's very much a kind of promise made in the heat of a leadership race. So I think, I wouldn't expect this to be rolled out in England, certainly anytime soon.
No. So the thing is, right, if you are a disengaged, in quote marks, parent, perhaps you're working all the hours God sends, you're not disengaged, but you haven't got time to go to school and learn how to bake a flipping scone. Perhaps you're estranged from your child, so you have to be a bit disengaged. Perhaps if you had lower attainment yourself at school and they struggle a bit more to engage with the school, and they want you to some way to go in and help. But that is, of course, what the Sure Start centres were supposed to do and did do a good job of before the Tories shut them all down. But surely when it comes to sending parents to school, Lizzie, the only ones who will go, oh, that's a good idea, I'll come along to school, are the ones who are already engaged, and the ones who are rich enough to not have to work, to be a stay-at-home mum, that sort of thing. They're the ones who are going to say yes. And they're the ones who don't have to be somewhere else, aren't they?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's certainly some of the people who would help, who might have time to help and might think it's a good idea. You can argue that, there are already initiatives in quite a lot of schools that are sort of similar-ish about, trying to get parents in and trying to get them to help with stuff. It is difficult, and it would put quite a burden, I think, on teachers to try and make sure that because teachers will know which families need a bit of extra support, but obviously trying to get those people into the schools is something that the teachers will have to do and may be quite challenging. And as you say, a lot of these parents who might benefit from this are not necessarily not there because they can't be bothered. They're, working a lot. They're not engaged. They've got lack of trust in the system. They've got complicated home lives. There are so many reasons why somebody might not be there. But I think, there is always, I do quite a lot of campaigning on free school meals, so I've dealt with Jeremy Miles before, but I think, a lot of the work that we've done with the Mirror in that space, all the schools we've spoken to and that sort of thing, they're always saying that there are often parents who want help with supplies, with food, with, want a bit of support, with childcare, with everything, because they're just struggling so much that the schools are having to sort of step in those spaces. And this is kind of within that ballpark, if parents are kind of struggling with budgeting, is there something that in the cooking, it would be a way that you could bring parents in and then make sure that they've got them and their kids are eating in school? Is there a way that you could do that like you do with breakfast clubs and things like that?
Is this what schools are for?
No, it isn't. But the government has, this is what schools are doing. Their schools have become, since the pandemic and before, because public services have been cut back so much, this is what schools are doing all over the place. They're intervening on child poverty constantly. And so I think, that is a huge factor. It's not what they should be doing, but it is what they're doing.
Yeah, it becomes one of those things. I mean, what do you think, everybody? Do you think this is something that your local school could do, should do, is doing, that would be beneficial? Do you think it's something that would put more pressure on teachers? Do you think it's something that would actually help children's attainment overall, and therefore it's something that schools should be doing? Mike says, becoming a parent is one of the few jobs you can take on with zero preparation or training, and you may be good or rubbish at it, much like becoming an MP. Yes, we could also ask MPs to go back to school with their children and perhaps learn some basic moral ethics and so on. But there is this kind of issues. There may be parents who, there's parents like me, okay, number one, who who considers school to be sort of 6.5, 7 hours off, frankly, the childcare, and someone else is looking after them. And that's when you can do all the other things that you have to do. So you can't just drop everything and go to the school and then spend another 3 hours there or 2 hours doing something, because that negates what you're trying to get done in that time. There are parents who are disabled, perhaps, who, need to have the respite once they've got the children off to school. Many of them work anyway. Being disabled doesn't mean you don't work. And if you're responsible, you might take time off work if you're a responsible parent to go to your child's school and engage in something, if there's some kind of scheme running. But if you're an irresponsible parent, the kind that, whether you're working class or middle class, is someone who's just not prepared to engage in that way, you're just not going to do it. I mean, I like to think I'm responsible, but when every year there's like a Mother's Day, come in and make crafts with your child for 3 hours in the morning, and I never do it because it always clashes with a standing commitment I've got. And frankly, I'd rather extract my own teeth. I'm not going to do that. It was someone working who's got 2 jobs, who's on universal credit as well, who's doing shifts. It's just not going to get in there. I just kind of think this is something that you should have community centre. You should have something to help people who need it and who are going to access it, like you said, Lizzie. But I'm not sure that school hours and doing it at a school and asking the teachers to do it when they're already wrangling 30 kids is the best way to do it. Now, this chap who's, let's just call him Super, says, how are parents meant to go to school when they have work? It is delusional. I suppose they're only aiming it at parents who are out of work, but a good chunk of those, especially where I live, are stay-at-home middle-class mums in an SUV. Of course, they're going to walk to school and help bake a cake. I'm not going to. I've got other things to do with my life. I don't know if I'm responsible or irresponsible now, but what I suppose the question is, how likely is it that English Labour are going to pick this up? You said you don't think it's very likely, but some of the stuff if he gets elected to be Welsh leader and does something like this, there is some cross-pollination that goes on, isn't there?
I think it's quite unlikely, just because, they like Welsh Labour and the UK Labour Party, sort of focusing on England, do some quite different things, especially in education policy. And I think, Bridget Phillipson, Labour's shadow education secretary, is very focused on childcare, breakfast clubs. That's kind of her thing, and driving up standards in schools. And I think she probably, I don't think they really have space for anything else, because Labour's manifesto is going to be quite slim anyway. And I think they've kind of set out quite a lot of their stall already. So I'd be very surprised if this kind of moved over, because they also, the UK, the Labour Party in England has refused to adopt the policies on free school meals that they do in Wales and Scotland. So, there is some difference on that.
Yeah, it's all involved, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think, it's also one of those things that this is a leadership election. I would stress, I think Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss both said a lot of things during leadership elections that never came to be. I think part of this is the point of it is trying to paint a picture of the kind of person he is and what his vision is, whether you think this is good or bad. There's not a lot of detail in what's been told. I suspect it's something he's sort of floated with my colleague in this interview. Maybe it's something he's been thinking about whilst he's been schools minister. Maybe he's got some ideas that he would implement later. But yeah, I think it's an interesting talker, isn't it? But
it's something to discuss, but it would need paying for, obviously, which isn't really in the piece. But I suppose the interesting thing is that what Welsh Labour do quite often, if it doesn't work, we've seen before, that's the kind of thing that the Tories use to criticise English Labour. Like, with the Welsh NHS is in a dire state, how could you trust Keir Starmer with the NHS kind of thing? Never mind what the Tories have done to it. But they like to use what's happened in Wales as a way to kick England. So is it possible, do you think, that, this is the kind of thing that Rishi, especially in a general election year, the Tories are going to say, well, look at the nanny state. What would Labour want to do? They want to send parents back to school. Isn't it outrageous? Boris was never going to return to Eton, kind of thing. And it's going to just be used as a way to criticise. Is Keir going to be a bit upset that this guy has just floated this, do you think? Is there going to be any kind of a row about it?
I doubt it. I doubt Keir will be too fussed about it, to be honest. I think it depends, like if if he'd actually won if he actually wins the leadership election, actually does it, then yeah, maybe. But Keir Starmer's been quite relaxed about the fact that Mark Drakeford, the current First Minister, brought in 20-mile-an-hour zones in Wales that has proved to be quite controversial. And the Tories have really gone for that in a big way. And like Keir Starmer's quite relaxed about it. I think he sort of sees that it's a different situation. Wales has different needs as a nation. It's got different politics. It's got a different, it's got different demands, and it is more left-leaning than England. Sometimes, it's had a Labour government for quite a long time. So, I think they're fairly relaxed about it. And I think the Tories, I don't know, they might go for it, but I suspect they're probably, I don't know if it's really controversial enough for them to really go for it.
Well, yeah, because, would Rishi object to having to return to Winchester? Possibly not. No,
I'm sure he wouldn't. But he also, I think he's very much a family man, and he makes a lot of it. So I'd be surprised if he was sort of going on and on about, making parents go back into schools, especially because, it's not like he can say, oh, well, parents have got too much on their plates and it's hard for them to make ends meet, because he just can't make points like that. He's too rich.
No, and I think we'd all be a bit concerned if Jacob Rees-Mogg turned up at the school gates one day. Yeah. There are some people you never want to see anywhere near a school, and Jacob's probably one was standing there like a spectre. Anyway, thank you for that, Lizzie. All right, we need to move. We have managed to find some good news in the world for you, and here it is. Now, 2 wheelchair-bound young men are going to climb Mount Snowdon, would you believe, to highlight accessibility issues in the countryside. Now, Josh and Maxwell are going to be using off-road wheelchairs. Wow, that's a brilliant thing to have, to make the climb, having previously been frustrated in the countryside by things like kissing gates, which are fine for walkers, obviously, but not if you're in a wheelchair, even if you're pushing a pushchair. I've struggled with kissing gates when out on a walk with a kid in a pushchair. Now, they say everybody should be able to explore nature by themselves, which is a fantastic attitude to have. And they've already raised £27,000 for a charity helping others with spinal muscular atrophy, which is a condition they've got. The link is in the comments if you want to give them a £5. Lizzie, is this proof, do you think, that anyone can do anything so long as someone doesn't put some ridiculous insurmountable barrier in your way, like a government, for example, coming along doing something unhelpful?
Yeah, this is great, because it also it just kind of throws up the fact that we've got this technology where you can develop these amazing technology like things where you can have these powered wheelchairs which allow people so much freedom, but then in the countryside you've got all these gates and fences that just don't think about that and weren't designed to allow for greater accessibility, and no one's really done anything about it. So, I think that's the hard thing about this would have been developing the wheelchair that can get you up Snowdon. It's not removing a kissing gate. So I think it's great that they're highlighting that, and, hopefully it means that people who are sort of landowners and people who do design sort of pathways and that sort of thing would be able to think a bit more about what is possible and allow everyone sort of the same access to sort of the beautiful spaces that we have in this country.
Exactly, and a lot of people say that the path up Snowdon is so well travelled, it's basically a motorway, but it's got rocky in parts, and it's pretty amazing that 2 people in wheelchairs are going to do it. It's also fairly amazing that Josh, who's 30, is an entrepreneur, and Maxwell's 19, is prepared to go and make the effort to go up there as well with him. I think that's absolutely fantastic. So if you can chuck a £5 in their crowdfunder, that would be amazing. Right. I think that's pretty much everything for today. Thank you, Lizzie, for joining us and explaining some of that. I shall calm down a little bit about the prospect of my having to return to school. I think the headmistress would say, not let me in, because whenever we've had an interaction, it's probably ended quite badly. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part. Thank you, Lizzie. We will see you all again on Wednesday, everybody, for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, stay safe and tatty bye.